Hey folks, welcome to What's the Dilly-o, the show where we sit down with builders who are reinventing financial infrastructure with tools that actually work. Today I have Will from Greenlight. Welcome, Will. Tell us a
Hey,
little bit.
so happy to be here. Thanks so much. What the Dilly-o? I'm so excited about this. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about Greenlight first?
Sure. At Greenlight, we build AI agents for risk and compliance teams at banks and fintechs. Our agents do mission critical work that help teams onboard more customers, solve fraud and criminal investigations, and ultimately serve more people around the world.
Fair enough. As I was kind of looking into your background, I realized that this has been a long time coming. You've been in this space for quite a while. I think you started at Meta, then you were at Paxos for a bit. Talk me through the journey. Like what brought you to building Greenlight?
Yeah, definitely. Like a lot of people in the world of risk and compliance, I kind of fell into this space because it was the most important thing to solve. When I was at Meta, we were launching payment experiences around the world. At the time, specifically, we were trying to launch WhatsApp payments in many markets globally. I remember when we were trying to launch WhatsApp payments in India, there's about a billion people who use WhatsApp every single day
Yeah.
in India. So it was a massive task. It could have been one of the largest financial products in the world. And you realize when launching a product that touches that many people, a lot of the complexities actually lie in the risk, compliance, and fraud space. It's not necessarily just how do we localize this payment experience to be for this market. It's how do you build really strong controls in place, risk management frameworks, and of course fraud frameworks. And so I was really enamored with that problem, and ultimately became something that we need to solve to serve more people and give them access to great financial tools. But when you zoom into this world, it's kind of I always think of risk, compliance, and fraud as two-part problems. The first problem is like detection. How do you detect potentially fraudulent events or criminal activities or fake IDs? And this is where there's amazing platforms in place right now that help you to screen for documents or to identify transaction fraud or to identify underwrite customers for credit. Those are awesome. From a technology perspective, those are also what supervised machine learning is very, very good at, right? Looking at billions of data points that you've seen in the past and using that knowledge from a data perspective to underwrite or make a decision on that new transaction or that new customer that you're seeing, like prediction engines.
Hmm.
But ultimately, every time you use a prediction engine and you have like a decision being made by a prediction engine saying like, hey, this looks like it could be fraud, you need to route it over to an investigative team.
Yeah.
And that investigative team or the operational team is an extremely this crazy manual part of most institutions, right? I think in a financial institution, compliance, risk, and fraud is amongst the most manual operations in the
Mhm.
entire bank. And why is that? It's ultimately because they're putting together all these different pieces of a puzzle. So you and I are sending transactions. They need to learn a little bit about you, a little bit about me. They need to go out and look at the transactional details. They need to look at all our documentation. It's kind of a bespoke investigation every single time. And it's not hard for a human to do, but it's been historically very hard for machines to do. Income language models, which are really good at unstructured data processing. And then if you think about language models and the jump to agents, which we can talk a little bit about that, agents being things that use language models to process and understand unstructured data and ultimately act on them, it becomes a really good opportunity to put agents like those inside of financial institutions and to automate those manual workflows. And so ultimately, I got really excited about agent technology because it allows you to solve for those massive scaling challenges that we have in the world of financial services. And if you can use agents to onboard more customers, review more fraudulent events, review more criminal activities, you can just serve more people. And when I was doing this at a company like Meta, we had a lot of resources, right? We could throw more bodies at the problem. But if I'm a community bank trying to serve more customers, I don't have that same luxury. And I think it's really important for the middle of financial institutions, so not just the top tier, to be able to serve many, many people. And I think automation is the only way that they're going to be able to keep up with the growing regulation and also the growing demands from consumers about what is going to be acceptable from their financial partner. So you're right. It's been a long time coming. I've been super excited about what the technology can solve in the spaces of risk, compliance, and fraud. But simultaneously, I think we're really mission driven over here at Greenlight. How do we enable more people in the world to access the financial products that they deserve? We can do that through automation AI agents.
Fair enough. I think you've talked a lot about the manual work of things, which is one major red flag in all of these workflows. But was there anything else that you saw that kind of like drove you to say, okay, this has to be built today?
Yeah, I think, well, the made it work is like the effect, or what is it? There's like the symptom, if you will,
Yeah.
right? The cause of this is like people don't get access to financial services. I think there's a survey, even for a commercial customer to get access to a bank account, the average is about 27 days still. That's kind of crazy. That is a crazy number to be happening in 2025. Or we work with one customer that onboards people around the world, and some of those are in jurisdictions that a lot of the names match a lot of the names in sanctions lists, and that just blocked people from those markets from accessing great financial products.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges that need to be solved here to grease the wheels, and we think a lot of that is due to manual work. If those weren't manual, those reviews for the sanctions or those 26 days for KYC for a corporate customer, those people just access things faster. So again, manual work is like kind of the problem that we solve.
Mhm.
But by doing this, you just, again, help people get access to more financial services. You get to reduce fraud. You get to stop bad actors from in their tracks. We're really excited about those outcomes that we can drive by solving the problem of manual work in a compliance, risk, and fraud department.
Fair enough. Given that these workflows are so complex and you're trying to build automations around this, which a lot of people have been trying to do this for a very, very long time, and
Yeah.
obviously LLMs made it somewhat simpler. How did you kind of get to that atomic kind of value and say, okay, this is the first use case that we're going to be building?
Yeah, great question. I think there's like two parts here. The one, we really like solving discrete problems. So I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but
Hmm.
your listeners, everyone probably is aware of that like MIT study of, 95% of these AI pilots are
Yeah.
failing. Okay, great. Why? And I think there's a couple of different reasons. One of the main ones that stuck out to me is that they're just a lot of, it wasn't clear what business problem those AI projects were trying to solve, right? It wasn't this discrete problem or discrete workflow that needed to be
Hmm.
solved. It was like generic Copilot for lawyers or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And it's really hard to measure, or generic Copilot for everyone in the office suites or something like that. Those generic problems are not that exciting to us because they don't solve something tactical. So for us, it was like, what's a tactical, discrete problem that we can solve was one side of it. And the second side of it is like, is the technology good enough to do that thing, right?
Hmm.
I want to solve tons of problems. The technology's not there to solve all the problems. So our very first use case was actually just such a common thing for anyone in our world. It's like handling these sanction, PEP, adverse media, and criminal watch list alerts, right? It was a very simple use case, and we were the first ones to do that in 2023. It was really exciting to use AI to solve and help remediate those use cases. We now do hundreds of thousands of those every single month, and it's really cool to see teams adopting that in such fervor. But then you go, okay, cool. Technology is advancing so quickly. So every time a new reasoning model comes out or a new capability, we're like, what new things can we solve with this problem? And again, when we think about things to solve, it's like, which discrete bodies of work can we solve? So it's not like generic, we can now analyze transactions like, oh, that would be perfect for an AML investigation on the L1 side. Great, let's go apply it there. And so that's how we roughly do our product development. How does the technology advancing? What can that enable us to solve? And where's a discrete part of the world that we can solve that in? We also put up like our kind of barriers that we're going to focus on financial crime for a long time. And we just think there's so much depth in the world to be solving
Hmm.
these problems, which in and of itself is helpful because then we can go talk to our chief compliance officers or BSA officers and say, hey, reasoning is now really good. What are some complicated jobs that your team's still struggling with, right? And that might be an opportunity for us to identify those, again, those incremental discrete problems that we can help solve.
Got it. So if I understand it correctly, you're developing singular agents for various kind of workflows, right? So that you'll have one agent that's just doing sections, you'll have a second agent that's just doing some sort of L1 investigative work, and you're basically building like very, very specialized what are those like when they build cars, like one thing at a time, like each person
Yeah.
would just do one thing. Like that's how you're kind of thinking about this.
We think of Greenlight as two things. It's an agentic architecture that has deep model validation, governance, and controls in place that allows it to select from tools to complete different jobs. So again, the orchestration engine is at the top. And then we have all these tools that we keep giving Greenlight the ability to use.
Mhm.
So an example of that might be transactional analysis. Analyze these transactions with this context in mind, or review this document with the policies of my company in mind. So almost these tools that the agent can then call. So you can imagine orchestration, choosing the right tools. And the third layer of that problem is what we call our trust infrastructure. Our trust infrastructure makes sure that we have guardrails, controls, and valuations in place to make sure it's doing all those things right. Just because you're analyzing transactions doesn't mean it's right, or doesn't make sure it means meets the needs of my institution. So you can see, like, we think about it in a fairly generalized terms, but you can then bundle those, like, okay, this agent with these 16 skills and these set of controls, great, that's our sanctions agent,
Yeah.
right? Okay, these things, bundle it all. This is our diligence agents. Okay, these things, bundle it all. It's our AML agent. Those
Yeah.
three are our three most common use cases: sanctions, AML, and like diligence. So EDD, CDD, KYC style reviews. But what we're seeing, and it's very exciting, is seeing teams build incremental agents on top of the Greenlight platform. There's not a lot of limitations. One of our large payment platforms is using Greenlight for help in their underwriting work,
Mhm.
right? And it's like, we didn't build an underwriting platform. We're not the specialized underwriting machine, but you can see how you can mix and match some of the tools, the skills that the agent knows to help out with parts of the underwriting workflow. And that's really encouraging to us. It's why teams that use Greenlight start to find all these different use cases for Greenlight after they solve one of those like discrete workflows. And that's awesome to see.
Cool. Um, the way I have kind of understood agents is that they're and I think a lot of people have said this, they're interns with PhDs, right? So you give them a job to do and they'll go figure it out, but you have to put these guardrails in place. And it's not that dissimilar to how you hire a summer intern, bring them in. Talk to me a little bit more about that trust layer, because as you know, compliance and risk folks are the least trusting of new technologies. How do you build that muscle for them?
Yeah, totally. I think trust is like two parts of it. There's like global trust, like what should the agent do regardless of what environment it's in? And then
Mhm.
there's the local, like what does this agent need to do to be trustworthy in my specific company's context, right? Like
Mhm.
my regulators or my business model. And so when we think about it globally, this is, we could talk about this for hours, but AI and kind of using agentic systems is just using another model, like to use the correct like term in our world. It's another model in the world of risk and compliance, meaning you can inherit a lot of the good controls and ideas you had from previous model governance, validation, and risk management requirements. So, for example, one big part of any model risk management program is like model soundness. Like, how did you conceptually think that this model would solve the problem that you are putting it against? You should continue doing that with agents. Some people think that with AI you need to like toss all the old playbooks out and like do new playbooks. Like no, no, no. Like use the playbooks that are working well for your institution already. Assess for things like model governance, model fairness, bias reduction, precision recall. Use the same things you've been doing before. And so these are some of those global controls we have. We try and steer towards like the guidance of things like an OCC 2011-12, so kind of like federal style guidance, while also working with things like SR 11-7, which are a little bit which is really helpful. So we just kind of put the best practices globally into Greenlight. That's both for like documentation and program style details and rigorous work controls, dashboards, and kind of reporting that allow us to feel comfortable meeting those standards. So that's like the global side. And it's more like, I wouldn't say theoretical, but it's not like testing with any data. It's really just kind of using, understanding how the model works. But then locally, like in the institution, it's really important to test any model that you're using. So we tend to work with a lot of Fortune 500 public enterprises, as well as OCC, FDIC, and Fed regulated banks. They all want to have their own model risk management program. They all have ways of testing models that they have in place. Often this is putting data through a system and seeing do we get the expected outcomes and are those outcomes in line with our quality assurance and quality control standards. Very kind of a very simple use of QA/QC style process for model risk management. And so we tend to do that with every single organization we work on before we roll out in production. And the keys there are, does this generic model work in my context? So for example, you might be a global remittance platform. You need to make sure that the model you're using works well across all your geographies that you're
Mhm.
working on. It can't just be, maybe it's overfit to the US. Other examples here is like we work with community banks that work with a very specific type of customer profile. Will it work with my specific type of profile? And so that's where like putting data in and use testing is really, really critical there. So that's what the second parts that we do on the kind of the local side. The outcomes of both of those steps are, what are the limitations of using this model? Where is it really exceptional? Where is it still need to be risk managed? Every model will have risks associated with it. And then what are the mitigations you put in place for every single risk that exists there? Ultimately, I think of like model risk management is not like this box that you check. It's like this process you go through with your partners. And every customer will have different risks that they need to manage. And our
Mhm.
job there as like a partner is to help them manage it very faithfully and thoughtfully, and then give them the confidence that they need to then go explain it to their regulators.
Cool. When operators are actually using your platform and they're partnering with you to implement it, are there specific spaces where you tell them that they should likely kind of like inject a little bit of their own insights and their oversight, where they should get into the loop?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like to think of, again, going back to like technology, not every job is created equal. Like not every task is equally complicated or simple. So for simple jobs, and an easy proxy for a job is like how many minutes does it take a human to do
Hmm.
that job? You might not need as much human involvement in it. So if a job takes 10 minutes, hopefully the agent can help you shrink it down to 1 minute. That's
Hmm.
the direction it. Where you need a lot more human supervision is those complicated jobs. So an example of a complicated job that we help teams do is institutional client onboarding, right? You're
Hmm.
onboarding that hedge fund, right, with 50 ultimate beneficial owners and six different product lines or portfolio lines. Those things can take 6 hours, 12 hours to do a review like that. You shouldn't put an agent to solve it in 0 minutes. Like, the juice
Yeah.
isn't worth the squeeze, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
want to like reduce as much time there while still putting humans in the loop. So we think that one thing that Greenlight or AI agents more broadly are going to do is remove that need for that L1 tasks in a workflow such that humans can focus on the L2 tasks. And that's where I think there is value. So it goes to question is like, where are their L2 tasks? Maybe in that like 10-minute review, there is no L2 tasks, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's all just data processing. But in those complicated jobs, that's where you tend to find a lot of those like things that require human reasoning and human expertise. That's where I think humans are going to spend a ton of the time. And I always go back to this thing, like when people talk about kind of automation, it can be very scary. But I've never met a compliance leader who's like, you know what? Actually, I don't need any more staff. Like we're solving all the problems we need to solve. That's like never happened to me before. Meaning, like as we have people out of the L1 areas, let's go pop them on those important program development areas that we need to focus on. Or even better yet, proactive investigations. Like our world of financial crime and AML is extremely reactive. It's like alert gets generated, now let me go take a look. That's not the. I'm very bullish that that's not the way we actually catch crime. It's by using human intuition to identify which areas of our network require the most scrutiny. Let me go dive in. Let me go pull on some threads. Very proactive investigations. And I'm very excited for a world where we get out of reactive and into proactive world by getting people out of these L1 tasks and into like more cognitively interesting tasks.
Fair enough. Let's dive a little bit more into the landscape as a whole.
Mm.
Right. AI agents only about a couple of years old. I think you guys' solution was one of the first, and since then there's been a huge influx of AI agents specifically in compliance. What's your wedge? Like, what does Greenlight do uniquely compared to everyone else?
Yeah, I think so. Agents is like it feels like agents like saying software now, right?
Yeah.
It's like this umbrella category which means everything,
Yeah.
everything and nothing at the same time. So I always like kind of say first just look at what is being marketed as an agent, right? I think there's like one of three categories of like what I see in the agent world today. One is literally the old technologies that we've been doing just rebranded. Like that's I've actually seen it a few times. So what is an old technology? Not necessarily bad technology, just like something that's been around for a while. This is like that decisioning kind of transaction monitoring. Here's an alert. There's no like new agent on there. That's just a detection task. We've been doing that for about 20 years.
Yeah.
So again, maybe sorry, before I jump into these three things, what I'm saying to like buyers or people who think about agents in this world, first just understand what there is actually the technology, what they're actually trying to do. So you can put it in one of these three categories. The first one is like, oh, okay, we've been using that technology for a long time. There's not no new innovation there. The second one that I see is using like air quotes agents to summarize, right? So here's an alert. Let me call ChatGPT and let me summarize what's happening in there.
Yeah.
There's value there. I think that's actually great. That's awesome. Um, and I guess there's value there. Is it a ton of value? I don't know, right? It doesn't really help you solve that 10-minute alert. It helps you maybe make that 10-minute alert 5 minutes. So it's a summarization task. And I think that's where a lot of the market is. Honestly, that's where we started about 2.5 years ago. So like that's where we found ourselves starting with because it's a helpful place to start. And I think that's where most of the market is today. The last side is like, if you think about actual agents, what are they? They're multi-step jobs that are ideally doing 90 to 95% of the tasks, not just summarizing and doing a single step. And this is where, in some worlds, you might not even need that complex space. Like, let's go to sanction, PEP, adverse media world. It's not that complicated, right? You need to make sure you're doing it really well with high fidelity and high guardrails. But there's no multi-step task in a PEP review. But this is where we spend our time in more complicated jobs. Like I mentioned, institutional corporate onboarding. Also, another area we're excited about is like complex AML investigations that are multi-step and require pulling on multi. That's where an agent's actually useful. So I go to like, that's where we firmly sit. These multi-step complex jobs. We can help you with the simple stuff. No worries. That's easy. But we also help you with those complicated jobs across your organization. The last thing I'll call out that is unique about the Greenlight platform is you can ultimately build incremental agents on top of Greenlight really easily using the latest technologies, right? So this goes back to my example of underwriting. We don't explicitly support it. Like that's not one of our use cases, but you can build any n number of use cases. And we're excited about that is ultimately the best people to build agents are like the compliance and risk staff in the bank or in the financial institution. They know their problems intimately well. So
Hmm.
how can you use something like a Greenlight as like a bicycle of the mind, if we want to use the Steve
Yeah.
Jobs analogy? Like how can we just solve any n number of problems that you're trying to solve by building your own agents on top of Greenlight? So again, I think of us as two things that make us different. One is like we're truly like agent first. We're actually doing multi-step complex jobs across the entire fin crime program. And the second one is we allow you to build your own agents on top of the Greenlight platform that solve incremental jobs within your organization, whether or not it's like that very clear, easy, kind of repetitive task that is common across organizations.
I think a lot of institutions, I think the vast majority of institutions today are agent curious, right? And you have the benefit of being in the weeds every day, and you've had that kind of mental shift over time from just using ChatGPT to building the summarization to the agentic stuff. But when you're having these conversations with buyers, is there like a mental roadblock there? Are they understanding what you're kind of putting down, or do they need that time to kind of graduate as you did from one mental model to another?
Yeah. The interesting part is I think everyone's curious about AI right now. And
Yeah,
maybe because, how do I say this? We put our, we are not in the business of like convincing you to use AI agents is maybe
yeah,
how I think about it, right? If you're not ready for it, no worries. Let's talk in 6 months. Like, cause the market's evolving so quickly
yeah.
that if that's not a spot you're ready for, no worries at all. Like totally understand it. Every institution has different risk tolerances. However, we're just seeing like the amount get move out of curiosity into like, I need to implement these now because I understand them. It's be incredibly high. I'm actually surprised at how fast this evolution is taking place. When we originally thought of AI, we thought it'd be like cloud, where cloud took a long time, especially in financial services, to become popular.
Yeah.
This is not that. I think we're seeing like a much faster rate of adoption. So I agree that we tend to spend our time with organizations that are like, I understand, I've done the homework, I've done the research, I'm ready for this, and we are the best in breed in doing that. And so I think the market is self-educating a lot in a really helpful and healthy way. There's also we benefit from when I'm in San Francisco. Dreamforce just happened, or should I say, Agent Force just happened, right?
Yeah.
Like where people are just talking about agents all the time, and everyone's learning from other sources, such that we get a benefit a little bit from that, and just focus on the ones that are ready to solve real problems in their risk and compliance stack. So um, saves us a little bit of time, but also like allows them to come to their own conclusions without being like coerced by like a sales process.
Got it. So you're seeing this both in fintechs, obviously, but then are you seeing this in the community banks as well?
Yeah, I've been frankly surprised that some of our community bank customers are much more ambitious with their AI goals than others. And you might go, why is this? I think there's this like negative connotation on banks, like they're slow for the sake of being slow, and they're risk averse for the sake of being risk averse. I think that's like very misguided. I think community banks are by definition almost like fighting really hard to earn those new assets and grow and compete in this landscape. They're really dynamic environments. And the ones that are just slow for the sake of being slow just will not be around in 10 years. It's just that's the nature we actually live in with community banking. Every year, there's dozens of banks that shut down. It's a really unfortunate landscape. You don't want too much consolidation in the top banks. So what we're seeing is community banks are very innovative because they know they're like fighting to earn that, incremental asset under management. And so I'm always like upset when I hear, I think I live in San Francisco, like there's this negative connotation like, oh, fintechs are innovating. Not at all the case. A lot of the innovation is taking place in community banking or regional banking. The only reason fintech exists is because the community regional banks saying, I will, work with you, X large company or Y large company. And so we're seeing a ton of ambition on the AI strategies from our banking customers, more so than fintechs in many situations. So yeah, it's been amazing to see. And personally, I'm Canadian, so I get a chance to go all these different parts of the U.S. It's amazing to
Yeah.
see how different people are tackling it. And banks built based in the middle of the country are doing some of the most innovative AI strategies. We're so excited about it.
Actually, if I think about it, that makes a lot of sense because fintechs tend to be, for lack of a better word, a little bit more arrogant about being able to build stuff in-house. And community banks tend to understand that they have a specific skill set, and maybe they should hire outside for the things that they're not able to do. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think there's like a lot of partnership at the community bank and regional bank space,
Yeah.
and we're excited about that partnership. It allows, um, bankers know what they're really fantastic at, right? And in many ways, if you're in a community bank, you're literally your community, you know your clientele, you know that base really really well. And technology is something that you can partner with others to think about. So I'm completely in agreement there. I also think there's this funny dynamic taking place where when bankers talk directly to the regulators. Sometimes fintechs talk to the bankers, right? So there's like this broken telephone in some situations where if they know that the regulator, they know what they're comfortable about, they're actually a little bit more confident making decisions because they
Yeah.
have that direct line with the regulator, whereas fintechs might be abstracted away sometimes. So that's like a curious thing that we're noticing as well. When you have that direct relationship, you might be able to explain the technology you're using better. Whereas if you don't have that direct relationship, you're working through an intermediary, tends to be a little bit more black and white.
Yeah, got it. Speaking of regulators, I think you've chosen to build in a hot space in one of the most difficult environments. Um, if you kind of fast forward 2 to 3 years from now, like what does the ideal compliance team kind of look like? How do you kind of see the role of AI agents fitting into this like deeply regulated space?
Yeah, you're right. Like we chose to build in a really complicated spot, and it always we did Y Combinator, and I'm always reminded of this like Paul Graham quote where he says, if you have the ability to do the easy thing or the hard thing, do the harder thing because it's
Perfect. Yeah.
harder to replicate. And I
Yeah.
just we always take that ethos here. Let's do the hard thing. How do we solve the hard problem here? And to your point, building AI for regulated space is just much harder than doing it for like marketing. Not that marketing's not important. It's just like it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
as regulated, right? Or at least not regulated outside of financial services or healthcare. But that's
Yeah.
besides the point.
Yeah.
So we've always chosen to do the hard thing. As it relates to like how does that impact how a compliance, risk, or fraud team is structured in the near future? I think it's just going to be a pretty simple allocation resources where you're going to have less people focused on that L1 tasks and tasks that are document heavy or data processing heavy or maybe like lightly financially analysis heavy and spending a lot more time on the complicated parts of an investigation. So again, those things where you might need to, oh, hey, like that says it has this transaction level. That's really bizarre because I saw another business over here in the same line of business in the same community doing a completely different transaction profile. Connecting dots that are going to be much harder to connect on the investigation side. And hopefully though, spending more time on like program and policy development. A lot of I look at consent orders in the AML space, a lot of them are from an inadequate like program level definition of like CRR, let's say, right? There's not the CRR wasn't sophisticated enough, and I ultimately attribute some of those program gaps to we're spending all of our time on operations and like
Mhm.
not enough time on like forward looking what is the best thing for our bank to have in place. So that's where I anticipate more people will spend their time. This also goes to like if I was, entering the space right now, or if I was like just started my career as like a risk management officer, it becomes really important to like learn how to use these tools, right? And the tools might just be like ChatGPT or whatever your institution is comfortable with, but learning how to use them will help you understand where to specialize. What are the things that those tools cannot do for you? Those are probably the things that are going to be the most useful to do. A simple example of this is like, ChatGPT can I can ask, like, make me a CRR policy for my bank. That's probably terrifying, right? You don't
Yeah.
really want that to take place. Maybe it's the editing and like localizing what is generic to the unique context of your bank, right? It's that last mile where a lot of the work takes place and where all the value is created. So I would just recommend for those people who are in those areas to start to use these tools, understand what they cannot do well, and understand like that might be the right area to specialize in, because ultimately it's going to become a lot of those things are going to be automated from a task perspective.
Fair enough. Is there anything Greenlight is doing to kind of like build towards that future outside of individual conventions?
Yeah. We're a huge believer in two things. One is like you shouldn't outsource innovation
Hmm.
at an institution, right? You should really, you shouldn't just like get a fish from your vendors, like use them to teach you how to fish, right?
Hmm.
And so again, this goes back to like at Greenlight, yes, you can use some of our out of the box like agents to solve repetitive jobs, but like how can your team experiment and build their own agents, right?
Hmm.
It becomes really important to experiment, try, and build. So build that muscle. We're really big fans of helping teams build that muscle of becoming builders, right? Making compliance teams builders themselves rather than just inheriting of technology. So that's one thing I think is really important, and it's something we use to help teams build to that eventual future where compliance is a much more proactive, strategic, and technology-enabled organization. The second thing is just like a little bit more like fun, honestly, is like we're really big fans of like going into institutions and doing like lunch and learns. Like, hey, here's what's happening in the AI world. It's not all scary. Like, I think when you just hear about it in headlines, you see like over dramatized kind of sensationalist posts and comments. When you just understand the technology, it becomes really helpful. Like AI is not all doing and all seeing. It's just processes unstructured data and can now use words better than before. You know,
Yeah.
and you put it like that, it's just like, oh, okay, calculator isn't scary. I
Yeah.
understand how a calculator works. I can use the calculator for some jobs, but I can't do everything with the calculator.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we like to see it, like almost dispelling rumors. And we find that like education is empowerment. If you understand how something works, you'll feel more curious and empowered to go spend the time, playing with it and using it in your organization. So those are two things that we like to do to help teams kind of transition to that world. I might call out one last one that I think is quite interesting. So automation is helpful for like automating operations, but it's also helpful for kind of creating a centralized brain for all those operations. So let me give you an example. Some of the teams we work with have thousands of investigators, right? And each one of those investigators knows a little bit about the customer population. It's in their brain somewhere. And that's great. But then if I'm the leader of that 1,000-person team, like I don't access all their individual brains. I can't actually understand what's happening over my client population. If you're using automation to do a lot of those reviews, you actually have a more like centralized view of what's happening across my client population. So we call that concept like risk intelligence. What if you could now, from a single dashboard, understand where the risks exist across your population, and what are some emerging threats that are existing? This again kind of puts you into a world where you can actually identify risks and mitigate them in a more proactive way than just like waiting for them to become SARS, let's say, right?
Mhm.
I think that's a really exciting proposition we're super interested in. And this all goes back to language models and AI are very good at unstructured data processing. They can help you understand all this unstructured data and structure it such that you can take like more high quality actions from it. So that's a third thing that we think will emerge much more cleanly in the next couple of years. We're excited to be like pushing forward that idea.
Got it. As we kind of wrap this up, I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
One thing about compliance most people get wrong.
I think having been like a product manager before, interacting with compliance from outside of the compliance function, there's always this perception that compliance job is to say no, right? To say like, hey, we can't do that. No, like I need to protect the bank. And I think that's wrong. And especially as we get a chance to work with so many different compliance professionals, the best ones are finding ways to say, yes, with this control. Yes, with this, right? And it's not the job of a compliance risk officer. That's a misconception that's like ill-informed and like their job's to say no. It's just maybe as a product person, you're always on the other side of that no. It is the best ones are thinking about creative ways to help move the business forward with proper risk mitigations in place. And that's a really hard thing to do. I don't think they get enough credit. I think compliance and risk are very, very underappreciated for how much they do to protect the institution and ultimately like earn trust. Financial services is all about trust. And if you lose that trust and you get a massive fine or you like lose customer data or you're using AI in a way that's not helpful, it's going to decimate the trust that they have in your institution. So yeah, I think compliance officers are underappreciated because the best ones are always trying to say like, yes, how do we move the business forward with proper risk mitigations in place?
Fair enough. I that resonates with me as a former operations person. I think I spent a lot of my time saying no, and then I realized that the why was very important to communicate as well. Because I think on the other side, revenue side, for instance, people are actually very reasonable if they understand why something is happening. Obviously, that also gives them ammo to kind of fight back to. But I think that leads to some interesting discourse. Okay, my last question, my signature question, what's the dealio with Greenlight in the rest of the year and going into 2026?
So in AI world, we talk a lot about L1 task automation. I think that's amazing. Just you can now do a lot more complicated jobs than you could do a year ago. And so at Greenlight, what we're doing is always trying to push the frontier on how much more can we automate for the teams that we work with. So in very candid words, that's like working on L2 automations, right? Working on things that are much more complicated. We want to always be pushing the frontier in an extremely like responsible and high governance way, and that's where we're innovating a lot these days. So teams that start to use Greenlight partner with us for the simple automations because they're the right place to get started for most organizations. But it's because they also see like, oh my goodness, they're doing all these other things that we're not yet ready for, but we can eventually benefit from, and then we can go on this journey with them. So all of our time is spent on like call it like R&D on how do you solve for more and more advanced and complicated use cases that move the business forward even further. So can't yet share what all those are, but we're really excited about what's coming down the pipeline.
Awesome. Well, when you are ready to share them, come back on the pod and we'll do a proper demo of those.
Awesome. Will do. Definitely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.